Can you all hear me? If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up.
Yes.
Oh, great. Hi, Erica. How are you?
Doing good, thanks.
Great, great. Thank you for coming on board. Did you watch the presentation a moment ago?
Yes, it was really great.
Oh, thank you, Erica. Thanks. I'm glad you watched it, and I'm glad that went well. Jill, can you hear me? Okay, we've got Jill and Debbie. Let's see. I can hear, but I don't have video. Okay, let me see. Okay, no problem. No problem. All right, no problem. Jill, you could always just put a question into the chat. If you've got a question or a comment, can certainly go about answering anything you might have in that fashion. Debbie, it shows that you're still connecting to audio. So again, if you have trouble doing that, you could use the chat as well. We'll probably have a few more people coming in because we sort of officially have the start time down as 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. So until that, let's just kind of talk. Erica, is this your first Functional Aging Institute Summit, or have you been to others?
It is my first one. I've wanted to come for a long time.
Great.
And
great.
It's just been a crazy 5 years taking care of my family.
Oh,
But
gotcha.
when this came online, it totally provided an avenue I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Where do you live?
Kansas.
Oh, really? You're a
Mm-hmm.
Kansan. I love it. What part of Kansas?
We're in Wichita.
Okay. I did my PhD at University of Kansas. So I spent
Oh,
6 years in good old Lawrence and in KC, Kansas City, Kansas, working at the Med Center as well. So
yeah, I did my undergrad there.
Rock Chalk Jayhawk.
Rock
All
chalk.
right. And Jill is in Olathe. Look at that. I mean, my gosh, we've got like a whole Kansas crew here today. That's unusual, but very cool. Good. Well, I'm glad, part of the benefit of a virtual conference like this is that people who maybe otherwise couldn't travel or it just wasn't fitting into their schedule well, they could actually do it virtually and log on to sessions that they have time to log on to when they have other responsibilities going on as well. So we've actually been really, really pleased with the number of attendees and the engagement of the attendees thus far. So I wouldn't be surprised if starting next year, FAI may have both a virtual summit and also a live summit. So essentially do both. Oh my gosh, it's Roberto Milani. One of my buddies from the Bay Area. How are you, Roberto?
Good. Look who I'm here with.
Hey, what's happening, Linda? Good to see you. You guys are rocking. Love it. Love it. You guys are in Benicia, huh?
Great session. What was
As always.
As always. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh.
Let's
step with a drop.
What's that? Sorry?
Sidestep with a hip drop.
Yeah.
What's that?
What is sidestep with hip drop? Why do we do it?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I mean, it's intended on one level to be a gait enhancement exercise, right? So anytime that somebody might get perturbed, bump into needing to change their movement strategy a little bit due to whatever their environmental effects might be, they may have to be comfortable with sidestepping or moving to recover balance in the sideways direction. And it's always nice to add on as we progress in exercise, add on additional required skills. So the hip drop adds a lower body strength stimulus. We actually load, through the posterior chain. And so we're getting strength and gait enhancement. And of course, after watching the vestibular session, we're getting that vertical vector and that horizontal vector. So we're getting multiple vectors of stimulation of the vestibular system as well. So we try to start throwing a bunch of different things at our clients in order to ensure that they're getting a reasonable stimulus based on whatever level of challenge is going to be appropriate for them. Obviously, I wouldn't do that with somebody who is living in a skilled nursing facility or who is quite new to exercise, maybe is significantly deconditioned. But as a level 5 exercise, it should be pretty appropriate for people who are reasonably well conditioned to begin with and still provide that level of challenge.
So the level 5 would be indicated for like the independent kind of right?
Yeah, it would be probably higher level independent living. So if you looked at the wheel model that FAI has, everything from fully dependent to elite athlete, that level 5 would probably be in the 5 and 6 level, where we're talking about kind of a recreational athlete or the senior masters athlete, but not quite the elite level. You would have to come up with level 7 or level 8 exercise for somebody in that,
Okay.
at that level of function.
And where is there a best in terms of programming for vestibular training, I guess? Is it better to put it, let's say, after like a mobility warm up, or?
Oh, good question. Yeah, yeah. So where to sequence it within
Yeah.
a single exercise bout? You know, it's interesting because you could go at it from a number of different perspectives. What I like to do, I mean, obviously, point that I tried to make within the presentation was that virtually every exercise that we do that is dynamic in nature with an older client will have a vestibular stimulation component to it, because there's going to be accelerations, there's going to be decelerations, there's going to be motion and multiple planes of motion perhaps, and there's going to be a vestibular challenge or stimulus associated with those. However, if you want to specifically do some of those vestibular training exercises and also the visual tracking exercises that go kind of hand in hand with the head turning and head nodding exercises that we talk about with vestibular training, I usually put those in right after the dynamic warm up. So I get them warmed up, I go into our sensory work, and then we start working through some of the other elements of the program. That's really personal preference for me. But I mean, there is also value to perhaps challenging those sensory systems after we have peripheral fatigue from a heavy resistance training session. So you can sort of play around with it. I don't think there's any necessity to put it exactly in one place. We just happen to put it right after a dynamic warm up as we continue to get the muscles warm, muscle temperature increased, and being more ready for activity.
Okay. And of course, I think, there's probably different benefits doing, a vestibular training, perhaps wearing shoes or being shod.
Sure, absolutely. So the whole key is ensuring that we are really providing the right amount of stimulus through all 3 of our sensory systems. So we want to ensure, I mean, not including hearing, which we know actually is now very related to balance as well, but vision, vestibular, and somatosensory. Obviously, if you're changing either the surface that somebody is on, you saw the AirX pad stationary exercise that I was demonstrating in the video, or if you're doing ambulatory gait-based stuff, barefoot, we're just creating a little bit of a different sensory environment on the feet. And, to me, having somebody without shoes, training without shoes, it is going to provide more of that tactile sensation that is really valuable to getting more somatosensory, kind of those, especially the touch receptors, the pressure receptors, getting more information on the central nervous system. The only thing that I occasionally struggle with is, a lot of older adults, first of all, they have trouble walking, moving without a lot of support on their foot. They're wearing substantial orthotics, things of that nature. And they don't really go through life very often without shoes on. So if we train them without shoes, but then expect it to fully transfer to a situation where they're wearing, whatever their footwear is out in the world, I'm just concerned that that loss of sensitivity, given the surface that they now find their foot in when they're wearing their shoe, might not have as much carryover effect. So I'd recommend kind of playing around with it. There's no absolute positive, you must do it this way. Maybe do a session with barefoot, or a set with barefoot, a set with shoes on, and just kind of play around with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right. You're welcome. You're welcome. Let's see. We've got a lot of people here. I can't believe, for some of you, this is really late too. This is well past 7 p.m. So I appreciate you all being here. Other people, it's late afternoon, and probably where are you all from? Go ahead and use the chat, and let's get a sense of where everybody is joining the summit from tonight. Be really interested to see. I already know that I've got 2 Kansas people. Yeah, baby. We've got an Oregon duck, maybe not a duck, but someone from Oregon. Bay Area, great. Miami. Okay, so Roberto and Linda are Bay Area, and I'm Bay Area usually as well. Ames, Iowa, Iowa State, boo. Baltimore, Jersey Shore. Good. Say hi to the situation for me, Susanna. I'm sure he's still out there somewhere. We got Franklin, Tennessee. Beautiful golf course down in Franklin, Tennessee, just south of Nashville. I played it years ago after ACSM in 2005. Amanda, we've got Woodbridge, Virginia. We've got the Temecula area. Very awesome. Great, great. Well, it's good to see. Okay, and we've also got somebody, Denver, who wishes we all were there. We would love to be there as well. Denver is such a great location for conferences. It's so beautiful, such a great, I love going up to Summit County and spending time, and especially Frisco, good old Frisco, Colorado. Great place to bike and hike from. So, hey, thank you everybody for coming on. Irv, good to see you, man. What I'd love to have you all do is, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself, ask a question, or put it in the chat. If you either can't unmute yourself, you don't have audio going right now, feel free to put in the chat. We'll just bounce things around for the next half hour or so and go on our merry way for another exciting day tomorrow. Irv, you and I, we both need haircuts. Is this your quarantine lack of haircut? You're muted, but I'm guessing the answer is yes. Okay, very good, very good. Okay, questions, folks. Well, I appreciate you all coming on after watching the session. Hopefully you get some questions about it. Erica, you're sitting in Denver.
I have a question, and it's my constant question, which is, I was already working online. All my clients were online already. And I do a lot of work based on Tim Anderson's original strength method. So we do head nods and crawling and that kind of thing. And I have a lot of clients who are really working on their head forward posture, right? Try to move it back. So I love head nods for that. Mm-hmm. But I worry because I do have clients with vertigo, and I have heard reports that head nods are not a good thing to do with my people with vertigo. And then I've heard reports that, like, oh, you got to do head nods for your vertigo people. And I can find articles that say both.
Right, right. It's interesting. Well, VRT, that vestibular rehabilitation training, has different elements to it. And the first element is habituation. Like a lot of VRT exercises are habituation exercises where we try to essentially create a tolerance to the movement that may cause them problems. So initially, the amplitude of the head nod and the speed of the head nod may be almost imperceptible, just not enough to actually get that acute kind of vertigo sensation occurring. And over time, we can increase the amplitude of the nod, we can increase the speed of the nod. But ultimately, the thing about vertigo is it's very much, we have good days, we have bad days, we even have good moments and we have bad moments. So it's definitely a little bit slippery in that way. Yeah. I'd recommend, getting a sense from your client if they're having, if they're in a flare-up period where things are really, really rough, or if they're more kind of in a little bit more of a latent period where they're not having as many issues, and sort of choose the amplitude and the amount of motion based on how they're feeling at that time. So you can just find out what speed and what amplitude elicits kind of the initial symptom and back off from that a little bit. And that becomes essentially what your training challenge is for that day. In addition to that, Erica, they probably should be working specifically with a clinical therapist on the various kind of vestibular reorganization exercises, such as Epley exercises, where we're trying to kind of displace those otolith crystals back to where they should be and get them out of circulating in the semicircular canals. And those are those weird things where you're like, lay back, turn your head, turn it 90 degrees, sit up 90 degrees in the other direction. Yeah. It's meant to essentially flush out those crystals. Okay. So that should be done external to your work with the client. In a clinical setting. That we're sort of at least getting guidance from a clinical professional to ensure that we're moving in the direction of reducing kind of the duration and severity of that, of those vertigo symptoms.
I spend a lot of time trying to make sure my clients in a group setting are not trying to give each other exercises to relieve their vertigo. Please talk to your doctor. Please
Yeah,
talk.
that can become like a domino effect, right? Oh, this works, and then they all start falling down.
Yeah. Put the hair dryer up to your ear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's maybe good for a little like water in the ear canal, but it's not going to do much for your inner ear, that's for sure.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you.
Great.
It will really help, I think, to make sure that I'm reminding people that the barely perceptible motion it's still a head nod for purposes of, getting our neck extensors to start to refire.
Absolutely. No question about it. Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate that, Christian.
You're welcome. Okay. Felicitas asked, hi, I just watched your recorded presentation. Curious about the levels on the exercises showed. Okay. So Felicitas, we talked a little bit during the presentation, kind of like an offer to all of you. I have an online assessment and program design platform for balance training and fall risk reduction called Mobility Matters. And the videos that I showed you are videos from the progression and regression sequences in Mobility Matters. So we have, based on the way a client is assessed, we have 3 assessments. We have the functional reach test, which is a static balance joint mobility assessment. We have a timed up and go assessment, which is basically looking at gait and dynamic balance. And then we have a 30-second chair stand, which is muscle strength, muscle power. Each of those are scored, and based on their normative value, how they score relative to other older adults, they fall into a category of either low functioning or high functioning. And if you're low functioning, you get level 1 exercises. If you're high functioning, you get level 5. And depending on what quintile or what 20% group you fall into, it will determine if you're getting level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5 exercises. So when you saw the level 5 exercise, the first stationary exercise, that would be in response to somebody who did very well on all 3 assessments. They would have had to score in the 80th percentile or higher in order to get that level 5 stationary head turn exercise. The second exercise we watched was a level 2 exercise. That would be consistent with a client who scored in the 20th to 40th percentile on the median of those assessments, and they would then get a level 2 vestibular training exercise. So it's really based on what their level of function currently is and what level of challenge of those particular exercises will sort of give them the right amount of stimulus, the best chance to adapt, the least chance of getting bored, and the least chance of being overwhelmed and perhaps falling. So we want to get right into that, meeting the client where they're at or what the flow zone would be. So it's challenging, but not too challenging based on their level of skill. Okay, let's see. Let's go to the next question. We've got Susanna. Vestibular system through Z Health. Okay, do you find that your clients find one particular exercise does help their balance better than others? Head turn versus bouncing up and down the sagittal plane, or tada, or tossing the hair over the shoulder. You know, it's interesting. It's very individualized. Generally, what we see in the vestibular rehabilitation literature and out in clinical practice would be things like either vertical head nods or head turns on the horizontal plane. We don't get a lot of diagonal motion. We don't get a lot of rapid motion. So we actually end up integrating some of those other planes of motion when we're doing some of our dynamic exercises, such as the tada, or such as the rotating punches, which would be another exercise that we do. So it's kind of tough to tell which one does the best, because ultimately they are getting vestibular stimuli throughout the entire course of their training session. My thought is, similar to how we should train muscles in all planes of motion, we probably should try to ensure that we're training our sensory systems in multiple planes of motion and multiple modalities as well. So as I was speaking to Roberto earlier, perhaps somatosensory system, we should think about doing some barefoot training and some training with shoes, just giving a number of different types of stimuli, using a firm surface, using a very compliant surface. And with vestibular and visual training, perhaps we should be doing things that incorporate sequentially a number of different planes of motion, so that we're really just building a resilience within the integration of all that sensory information coming into the brain. It is really, in my opinion, neuroplasticity. We think about neuroplasticity as the brain volume increasing when we do puzzles, or where we do a lot of aerobic training and it causes our hippocampus to get bigger, and wow, our brain is changing, so it's showing neuroplasticity. But if we get better information coming into the brain from our periphery, and it creates better motor programs out, that's another form of neuroplasticity. We're getting our brain to produce better motor outcomes because we're enhancing and improving the sensory information coming in. So we should try to stimulate in as many ways as possible our sensory systems so that we provide the most wealth of information for sensory motor integration by the central nervous system. I hope that was helpful. Somebody was unable to see the videos of the exercises. Marion or Marlon, I think that's Marion. The pre-recorded session, were you all able to watch the videos on the pre-recorded session? I think they were all sequentially in there. What I'll do, if you would, just send me an email and I can send you access to that pre-recorded video that does have each of the videos played out. Let's see. Is closing eyes on some or many of the exercises helpful if it feels safe? Does it add something? Say like doing the tada. Absolutely. I mean, I would say that if we are, so let's think about the tada. So we have those three sensory systems. We have vision. If you close your eyes, you remove vision, right? So now we're more dependent on getting information from the vestibular system and the somatosensory system to help us maintain our balance in the context of that particular exercise challenge. Well, if we're doing a tada where we have both a vertical and rotational vector, we're also challenging the vestibular system during that exercise. So that would not be a challenge to the same degree as having your eyes closed for vision, but it still is a lot of motion. We're getting a lot of vestibular input and a lot of vestibular challenge. And with the tada, where we're rotating onto the weight onto one foot, ending up on the toe of the trailing foot, we're getting a lot of shifting of weight and different stimulus to the somatosensory system as well. So I would say eyes closed with the tada would probably be what we would consider perhaps for somebody who is doing really, really, really well, is well progressed, is handling a lot of the other exercises we're giving to them with a lot of ease. We use what's called the 75% rule. If a person with concentration and focus can perform an exercise really almost textbook 75% of the time, and the other 25% of the time, maybe they're a little bit wobbly, a little bit off kilter, then they're in a very good learning zone. They're in a learning zone where the exercise is challenging and it still requires focus. If they're going through the motions and every single repetition is perfect and it's clear they're not really engaged, then maybe it is time to layer on another challenge. And perhaps for the tada, another challenge that could be laid on would be some sort of a visual challenge, whether it's closing eyes or whether it's shifting the eyes back and forth as you're doing the rotation. I would just say make sure that the person does the standard tada effectively, at least 75% of the time, before you consider progressing and modifying. All right, let's see. John, is closing eyes and many of the exercises helpful if it, oh, sorry, that was it. Hope that answers your question, John. Roberto, does peripheral neuropathy affect vestibular training? You know, peripheral neuropathy being the lack of sensation coming from the feet due to whether it's diabetes or some idiopathic neuropathy, we're getting less somatosensory input from the lower extremity, right? So similar to if somebody were to lose vision at some point in life or have another sensory impairment occur during life, it does create a situation where we have to become more acutely adept utilizing the other sensory systems that are still intact to essentially take up the slack for the one that is showing challenge. So if someone's got diabetic neuropathy and they're having trouble with sensation of the lower extremity, then just by virtue of still needing to successfully engage in activities of daily living, as long as they're still out there moving and doing stuff, they're going to have to develop a greater sensitivity and a greater reliance on their other sensory systems. So their vestibular system will likely become more acute than it would have been if they had not lost that somatosensation. So yeah. But that's not a reason to tell people to chug some 7-Eleven big gulps and, hey, we want your vestibular system to get better, so let's give you diabetic neuropathy and you'll get a lot better really quick. Instead, let's train the vestibular system and keep the somatosensory system intact as well. Okay, great. Irv. Okay, training technique, elderly, Parkinson's clients, progression, supported, unsupported. Here's your question. Are there studies showing stepping drills, even tandem walking, really reduces falls risk and falling? Because it's impossible to create falls in the gym environment safely, whereas in clinics and academia they can. Right, they have those suspension systems. And they have, okay, that's all I can get is subjective feedback from clients. They almost but didn't fall when. Exactly. Okay, so yes, Irv, there is data that doesn't suggest, but there is data that actually shows that doing dynamic stepping exercises does reduce fall risk. Okay, so there's a study, I referred to it in the presentation. It was done in 2011 by Sherrington, and it showed that we really need about 50 hours of consistent specific balance training, such as dynamic balance work like you're referring to, before we see a reduction in falls occurrence. However, we start seeing the variables that contribute to fall risk become better within even 2 weeks. So if you go to that primary source, or I could send it to you, they refer to several articles that really use stepping strategies as their intervention technique. And they found that they are efficacious in not only getting somebody to feel more balanced, but actually having the long-term outcome of reduced falls occurrence. So keep doing those multiplanar step return, rocking feet, or even if they're advanced enough, hop to balance exercises. Go ahead, Irv, you're now off.
Is that when they do those types of studies, or that study, I haven't read it, but is that real life estimates, or is that clinical testing of balance? Because I've been to conferences and I've heard studies about it. Invariably, everybody's gated. I mean, they got a gait belt on that's suspended, and you can see that reaction time improves, step rate, and all those things improve.
Right.
But does that transfer to the real world? And how do you test that?
Yeah, generally studies that track whether falls are prevented or not are really large, complex studies where you've got interventionists and then they're working within a health system, and they literally track the number of self-reported falls or ER visits that participants in the study made due to falls across a period of time during and post-intervention. So basically, there are studies that have shown that those sorts of dynamic balance exercises have a protective effect on reducing self-reported falls and ER visits in response to falls in the real world after there's been at least about 50 hours worth of accumulation of training. Okay, so yeah, those are the sorts of studies which have about 12, 15 different authors, because you've got the whole clinical personnel that's doing all the tracking and the treatment. You've got the intervention personnel. I mean, those are pretty big studies and tough to run, but those kind of provide the foundation of understanding that really exercise, out of all the things that can reduce fall risk, exercise consistently exerts the strongest influence. There are other things we can do as well, modifying home hazards, reducing pharmacy or the number of medications or dosages people are on, changing vision and hearing prescriptions. But ultimately, those sorts of studies demonstrate that physical activity, exercise, intentional exercise that is very much geared to the areas that we know relate to fall risk have the greatest potential of moving the needle for older adults.
Good, thank you.
Sure. Let's see, Dan Richie. Who's that? Dan Richie's on. Hello, Dan. What can we look forward to in your live session tomorrow afternoon? Okay, so yeah, I've got one more session. It's tomorrow afternoon. I guess it's 3 p.m. It's noon my time. I'm Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, I do believe. I'll be on that session with my 3 good buddies. We're kind of like the 4 amigos. That's going to be Evan Osar, Robert Linkle, and Ryan Glatt. We're going to be talking about optimal aging, a paradigm for optimal aging. Because so often we tend to kind of get pulled in one direction or another. We become very strength-centric with our programming, or we become very corrective exercise-centric or very balance-centric with our training programs. And we need to recognize that older adults need to address all of these areas of function, or else there is going to be one area that is likely disregarded or less focused on, which will lead to problems down the road. We need to make a jack of all trades, that's kind of the term that I typically use, or a Jill of all trades, in order to be a resilient older adult. So Robert, Evan, Ryan, and I are working on developing essentially a whole assessment and programming technique or programming system so that we can guide and ensure that every one of our clients is receiving the right dose of all these different types of exercise. And we don't have to go a bunch of different places and say, well, you know, I just get an hour exercise for strength from this guy. I just get an hour of corrective exercise from this guy. Well, what do? I can't do them both. I only am with this person, you know, 3 hours a week. So our goal is to really help provide guidance on how to integrate all these meaningful elements into individual training sessions that progress over time. So we're kind of coming at optimal aging from a multimodal yet still integrated perspective. So that's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. I urge all of you to come and check it out. Let's see. Will I end by 6 Eastern tomorrow? Maybe not. I doubt it. We'll probably just go for 12 hours or so. Galit, did you hear about Balance Torture System? Yowza! Here we go. I've got it. A treadmill which was built in a platform, and the system actually gives little perturbations, either bumps people or causes little trips and stumbles. Yes, I have read a couple of studies. One of them was, in my opinion, I really question the methodology. So they have these treadmills that actually create unexpected perturbations to balance. We call that perturbation training, basically simulating getting bumped into somebody on the sidewalk or pushed from behind by somebody that doesn't like you, and requiring you to be able to recover and keep your balance. It's a very reactive balance sort of situation. Those studies, one of them, the first study to come out utilizing a system like this, said after one acute session where a little trip hazard would come up on a belt and cause the person to stumble forward, one acute session had a protective effect for 12 months from individuals falling. There's just no way. There's no way that's accurate. So when I started looking at the methodologies, they didn't control for a number of things. And essentially the study may have been a little bit biased toward having a beneficial outcome. I do think perturbation training is very helpful, because part of perturbation training is this unanticipated or unexpected disturbance to balance that somebody needs to quickly react to in order to maintain balance. So I think perturbation training is good. It shouldn't be the only method that we utilize to train balance. We shouldn't be following our older clients around the gym and randomly pushing them or hip checking them or bumping into them, because there are so many other inputs that come into balance and fall prevention that need to be focused on as well. And honestly, doing resistance training where we're doing rapid speed resistance training, perhaps it's a multi-directional stomp, perhaps it's something like a modified sort of snatch motion. Those sorts of powerful movements are what contribute to the type 2 muscle fibers being able to fire quickly and produce those recovery motions in response to perturbations. So I don't think perturbation training is the only way that we can help somebody recover from a trip or a stumble. Simply doing like high velocity resistance training is just as effective. All right, let's see. Here we go. What else do we have? Did I miss any? Are there any questions as I'm poking around here? No problem, Galit. Thank you. Any other questions? Got a good crew. I really thank you all for being on. This is fantastic. All right, what is our time? All right, we're getting on, it's 4:26. I'm gonna give it 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes, and you're welcome, John, no problem. And I would like to ask all of you real quickly. Let me talk about Mobility Matters really quickly. So again, it's a balance training and fall risk reduction online platform, mobilitymatters.fit. So www.mobilitymatters.fit. That is a subscription-based online platform that I run. It is specifically to individually assess and have customized fall risk reduction balance training programs created for any and all of your older clients, from your least functional older folks who would probably be getting level 1 exercises across the board, to your high level function, recreational, even competitive athletes who are still going to be getting appropriate level 5 function challenge exercises. I urge you to check it out. If you email me and say, hey, I saw your webinar on Functional Aging Summit, I will give you 2 additional months completely free. So basically it's an added value sort of thing. I will work with you on Zoom calls to kind of get you trained up to utilize it. And we also have prepackaged videos that you can get running with immediately with your clients. Balance and gait, sensory stimulation, muscle strength, muscle power, warm up and cool down. So please check it out. I look forward to seeing some of you there. All right, hey, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing some of you tomorrow. I'm gonna be consuming a lot of great education just like you. Hey, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a great night. Bye-bye, everybody.
Also.
Bye.